Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 5, Regent. The aftermath or hangover from such a high of Episode 4, the beginning of the Dance of the Dragons. But this episode has been described as a whole lot of nothing. Treading water, wasting time until the next epic dragon showdown. But here's my take. This episode kind of has a bit of that, but it's more importantly a build-up or set-up episode for what's to come. It deals with the fallout of Rhaenys' death, the reaction from both the Green and the Black Council to the battle at Rook's Rest, Jace's plan to find the dragon seeds to ride the riderless dragons on Dragonstone, and whatever's going on with Daemon at Harrenhal. At first, I really enjoyed the Daemon side quest at Harrenhal to recruit the Riverlords to his cause, but now I don't know what's real. And that dreamlike sex scene was completely unnecessary. It's weird and it could have been handled in such a better way. They must have had a better way to explain Daemon's inner trauma and the issues being a second son. I think this is one of the weaker episodes, perhaps the weakest of Season 2. I'm in no way rushing to rewatch this, but I'm not saying we can have or need dragon battles every single week. Far from it. But I feel this episode lacked an important element of what's made Season 2 a success so far. Every episode has had a build-up and a strong story, with character development and foreshadowing, whilst having a hook at the very end, pulling you back in for more. Episode 1 had blood and cheese, Episode 2 the Cargill brothers showdown, Episode 3 Rhaenyra and Alicent's reunion in King's Landing, and of course Episode 4 Rook's Rest and the first dragon fight. What did Episode 5 have? It ends with Jace and Rhaenyra agreeing on using dragon seeds to win the war. But guys, personally, as someone who sees himself as a hardcore fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, having read the books, watched the show many times, and spent countless hours online discussing the series, I appreciate the more character-driven episodes. I'll spend an entire chapter in the books with Tyrion Lannister describing his inner thoughts and feelings. Or an early episode of Thrones where two characters duel with forked tongues rather than swords. But I also understand the casual audience approach, where they need some sort of hook every single week. Not a battle per se, but at least one sequence that is memorable. One sequence that can get a social media reaction. But I feel this episode, more people are discussing how poor and weird Daemon's arc has become. And at the centre of it is that sex scene, completely and utterly pointless. It feels so disconnected and nobody knows what's real anymore. This episode was over an hour long, and the material they have could have been dealt with in half the time. A large portion of this episode is the fallout of Rhaenys' death. Corlys is heartbroken and lost the will to fight. And I think about it, his house has suffered more than most in this conflict, even before the dragons took flight. I would say the MVP of this episode is Baela Targaryen, who I think has been heavily underutilised at times. But I think a major issue with House of the Dragon is even though it's focused mostly around three houses, Targaryen, Velaryon and Hightower, but there's just not enough screen time to go around. And if you compare it to Game of Thrones, which had a larger scale and scope, dozens of houses and characters, but it had the pleasure of being able to leave out main characters for an episode or two, sometimes longer. Jon and Dany didn't have to appear every single week. We could leave them on the back burner and focus on other characters, and allow them time to breathe and develop. Whereas House of the Dragon seems to have the need to find scenes for its main characters, at the expense of sometimes far more interesting side characters. Take Helena for example. She's very interesting, but at times she's nothing more than just one or two scenes, and she shows up, says something mysterious that could be from a dragon dream, a hint at what's to come, or even prophecy, and then she disappears, and we're left theorising what it means. And perhaps allowing Rhaenyra, Alicent and Daemon and others time to take a back seat for an episode, maybe more, would have a huge advantage. But with only 8 episodes this year, I don't think that's possible, and unfortunately the side characters will suffer. This time around the Greens are far more interesting, especially Aegon, but episode 9 in season 1 really missed Team Black. And I think this is a good time to mention the infamous dragon pit scene from that episode. During this week's Inside the Episode, the showrunner declared that Meleys was a beloved dragon in King's Landing, having flew over the city many times, and the small folk will see her decapitated head as a warning, a black omen. But did the small folk forget that when she crashed through the dragon pit, during Aegon's coronation and killed countless civilians. It's almost like Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet moment. And parading Maely's decapitated head around the streets is going to be important, as it showed us the small folk see dragons no longer as invincible gods, which comes into play later on in one of the most infamous scenes in Fire and Blood. So Rook's Rest has been labelled as a victory for the Greens. Aegon, the second of his name, has defeated the traitor Rhaenys and Maelys, but we know the truth, as does Criston Cole, and those who witnessed Aemond totally trying to end his brother and place himself on the Iron Throne. On the show, Aemond is heir to the Iron Throne, as Aegon's second son Maelor doesn't exist, and Aemond is openly wearing the Conqueror's dagger by his side. He is now Regent, whilst his brother recovers from these horrific Anakin Skywalker-esque wounds. He's always been seen as a weak king, his council undermines him, and with these horrific burns, broken bones, and unknown internal injuries, there's no recovering from this. Plus Sunfire, his dragon, is out of action and is left behind at Rook's Rest. Aemond is in charge now. He's the most powerful man in the realm, with Vhagar by his side. The episode did remind us that Vhagar needs time to recover after her fight with Maelys, but Vhagar is feared all over the realm, from Dragonstone to the twins. But as for Alicent, she's received the Rhaenyra treatment. Even though she held the regency whilst Viserys was bedbound, the small council do not want a woman ruling during war. Not even her allies, her so-called allies, Larys Strong and Criston Cole. I think Alicent's run at the top is over. She no longer has any control over Aemond. Aegon is done as ruler, and her father Otto is no longer hand. Maybe now she understands what she helped to do to Rhaenyra. And speaking of Rhaenyra, she's not having a great time either. The Black Council know that she's not a warrior. They treat her more like a woman than a ruling queen, and especially not a battle commander. But her life's far too important. She knows that, even though she wants to get involved and fight for her cause. But guys, I did laugh when she said that Syrax could outspeed Vhagar and thus stand a chance. Perhaps Daemon was right when he said that Caraxes and Maelys should have double-teamed Granny Godzilla from the very beginning. And I think this is a perfect time to discuss Jace. He took his dragon Vermax to the twins to gain their support, and more importantly the crossing, to allow the Starks easy access across the Trident. And I feel that Jace is another character that's been wasted at times, but I feel that's the point. Baela gets missions, whilst Jace has to sit tight at Dragonstone. But just like Rhaenyra, his mother, his life is far too important to risk because once Rhaenyra takes the throne, he's heir, and his life is an important part to her claim. And to be honest, Vermax isn't big and experienced enough to face Vhagar, even with backup. But now that Jace has negotiated terms with the Freys and come up with a plan to get Vermithor, Silverwing and Sea Smoke riders, I think he's kind of proved himself. Sea Smoke has seen his fair share of battle during the Stepstones, and Vermithor and Silverwing are two very large dragons, once ridden by the old King Jaehaerys and his wife, Good Queen Alysanne. They're not as big as Vhagar, but Vermithor is a big boy and Silverwing ain't too far behind. If they teamed up against Granny Godzilla, she would be in trouble. Jace's plan is to use those from other houses that have Targaryen blood. It's risky, as having blood doesn't guarantee the dragon will accept you as a rider. That's why Rhaenyra put her foot down to having Rhaena try to ride Vermithor or Silverwing. And remember, Rhaena has been sent to the Eyrie in the Vale, with basically hatchlings and eggs. Something that the Lady Arryn isn't too happy about. But having these dragon seeds put their lives on the line is a pretty good idea. Who cares if they die? They have to volunteer for this, as who wouldn't love having a dragon of their own? And guys, you know the dragon seeds play an important part on what's to come. And I can't wait to see my boy Vermithor in action. After Caraxes, he's my favourite dragon, and then third would be Rhaegal. Comment down below your top 3 dragons, from Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, and also from the books and history. So I'm not going to spend too much time on Daemon at Harrenhal. It's getting weirder and weirder every single week. I feel it's run its course. It feels very contrived at this point, doesn't really make sense, and nobody knows what's real anymore. He's allowed the Blackwoods to commit crimes against their long rivals, the Brackens, and the other River Lords have now refused him aid because of this, because the Targaryen banner was seen flown alongside the Blackwoods, something Daemon wanted to keep secret. But in Westeros, when does anything go to plan? But I feel like Daemon's done everything he can do at Harrenhal, and he will leave next episode, and it's about time. And I'm unsure if we'll ever find out what's really been going on with these visions and dreams. They might leave it rather ambiguous. We might never know the truth about Alice Rivers. I suppose it's given us an insight to Daemon's thoughts and the trauma of his past, but at this point, I'm done with this subplot. I love seeing my boy Caraxes again, but I'm so glad Daemon's moving on. I suppose he's going back to Dragonstone and Rhaenyra. He's been avoiding our ravens, but he's told the audience he plans to rule as king, with or without Rhaenyra by his side. And I think many people romanticize Daemon, but we can't forget the first time we met him, he was sat at the Iron Throne, something that he has no right to do. He also killed his first wife, and his time with Laena, his second wife, was very, very complicated. But at the same time, I felt that was rushed and we didn't see enough of it. But we also know he has basically no relationship with his daughters. And even though it's clear he loves Rhaenyra, at this point I'm unsure if the writers know what to do with Daemon. Remember, George R.R. Martin describes Daemon as a very grey character in the books, and we also know George is heavily involved in the show. I believe he's actually a co-creator, but he doesn't write everything, nor agrees with every single change in the books. I don't think he was too fond of the changes from Blood and Cheese. So I'm interested to hear his take on how the show has handled Daemon and how it all ends for the Rogue Prince. Guys, I love House of the Dragon. It's brought a lot of Game of Thrones feelings back for me after the finale, but I haven't enjoyed everything, and this episode is a prime example of that. But I suppose I'll reserve judgment for all the changes to the characters and the plot when this season's over, and I suppose more importantly when it's all done. I think the plan is 4 seasons to wrap it all up, but that's a discussion for another day. Let me know your thoughts on episode 5, and I think most people will want to talk about all the stuff involving Daemon at Harrenhal. But for me, this is one of the weaker episodes, maybe the weakest of season 2. This is not an episode I'm going to rush back to rewatch, but I'm still very excited for next week and the Dragon Seeds. Anyways guys, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.